Hopefully we won't be hearing, hopefully we won't hear that on the recording. But welcome everyone, and I apologize for the late start. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you. And as we're celebrating one great holiday, we're talking about a volunteer leader's best holiday of the year, and that's National Volunteer Week. So, welcome to Celebrating Service, creating honor ways to honor volunteers during National Volunteer Week. I'm Melissa Sherry, and I'm with the Michigan Community Service Commission, and we are delighted to be here today to talk to you about this great opportunity. So, here's some of our objectives. We're going to talk about the significance of National Volunteer Week, why those celebrations matter so much. And we'll talk about whether we're honoring or recognizing or rewarding volunteers and what's the pros and cons of all. And then understanding meaningful versus costly recognition, recognizing that in organizations, we always have limits and constraints. So you don't necessarily have to be constrained by cost to be able to have a meaningful recognition opportunity for your volunteers for this special week. And then we're going to talk about some creative, innovative ways to honor our volunteers. And I'll give you some examples. And then we're going to switch it over to some personal recognition opportunities. And then we'll bring it all together and we'll talk for just a moment as we're wrapping it up about how it can align with your organization and really begin to create a public face of what recognition looks like with your volunteers. So, what is National Volunteer Week? This year, and I am so sorry, I changed this date, and this is not the right date. It picked up the 2006 date. It's national, it's like the 20th through the, what is it, the 20th through something. I'm not sure why it did that. But anyway, we'll send out their real date. So National Volunteer Week is an annual celebration that honors the profound impact of volunteer services and the power that volunteerism has to address society's greatest challenges. This special week highlights the significance of the efforts of strengthening communities and enriching lives. So it's always something much larger. And the most impactful National Volunteer Weeks that I've celebrated have been ones where volunteers have been celebrated across the community. One of the things that we do here in the state is our governor typically issues a proclamation, and we will share that with you this year, as we always do. And please share that with your volunteers. I think it's a nice way for volunteers to be especially honored. So, how did National Volunteer Week come about? It started in Canada in 1943 that honored the significant role of women who who were participating in war efforts. And then in 1975, it was President Nixon who issued an executive order establishing National Volunteer Week in the United States. And this year is a very special year because it is celebrating our 50th anniversary of National Volunteer Week. Oop. So, why is it that celebrations matter so much? Traditions are an important opportunity for the community to reinforce a positive culture that values people. I'm sure that if you think about it, every organization has their traditions. In past organizations that I've worked in, it might have been a picnic, it could have been a luncheon, it could have been an award ceremony for service awards. It was lots of different ways that we celebrated it. But those things were always ways that reinforce the culture of why volunteers matter so much to the organization. And then the other thing is it creates bonds between volunteers and the organization, we talk about that community cohesion and how important that is. We also talk about ways that show appreciation and value that the organization has for the contributions of their volunteers. And it's a great way to demonstrate the impact of volunteers within the community. And then, of course, to honor those sacrifices of those who served and how they choose to serve your cause. So, we're going to go into understanding meaningful versus costly recognition for volunteers. This is something that I know every organization I've ever worked for, we've always faced this, we've always encountered this. And like, how do we um, overcome this? So, what organizations oftentimes get wrong is putting kind of all your eggs in one basket. So, volunteers rarely cite money as a motivator. Research also shows the lack of meaningful acknowledgement, not the lack of perks, is what causes disengagement. I've been in organizations where they've had a lot of perks, and perks are a good thing, but they're not something that is going to keep engagement high. It's like short term. They say this even with employees. They say, you give them a perk and it's nice for now, but not, it doesn't correlate long term to engagement. There's more things that are less tangible that encourage that engagement. Not to say that you shouldn't, they're good things, but they have their place, but they're two separate reasons. So costly events can feel impersonal or performative if not paired with genuine appreciation. That's something to think about, like with your big luncheons. This is something that we really worked on in past organizations where I've been a part of. And then to keep in mind that they can really drain resources. And volunteers oftentimes say they would rather funds be spent on mission aligned work, which is what they care about more. So some of the things like expensive branded merchandise, it's nice, it's a perk. High end baskets, same thing. Gift baskets, paid entertainment or venues. We would sometimes, in past organizations, get tickets to like a Tigers game, a Lions game, an MSU game, something like that. And they were very much appreciated, but it was definitely a perk. And then the banquets and the large luncheons, they're nice, but again, if they're not personal, they can kind of miss the mark. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying that it's something you shouldn't do. If it's a tradition and people like it, that's awesome. Keep doing it. So some of those low cost, meaningful recognitions include those personal thank you notes referencing specific contributions, and then opportunities that share the impact, stories about how volunteers changed lives. And then those shout outs, those public acknowledgments that highlight individual impact. And then the see me, they want to be seen, not rewarded. And this honor has been earned by them. If they're in your organization, it's not a reward, it's you're honoring them. And sometimes we have to rethink that. And I know in organizations, it was a tradition to do service awards. And I think that there's a place for that. It's fine, but it doesn't always reward the impact of people who, for example, in one organization I worked for, you had to wait 5 years before you were recognized. And we decided we needed to change that because you could lose a lot of people way before that. So think about that. So make sure that recognition is you're being seen they're being seen in the organization, they're being honored in a way that's meaningful to them. Here's a little chart about some rewards recognitions and honor. So the concept of volunteer recognition, what it means, it's the ongoing acknowledgments of contributions. And the primary purpose is motivation, appreciation, retention. How does it feel to the volunteers? They see what I do. The rewards, they're those tangible incentives or gifts. They're perks, incentives, sometimes they're recruitment, and they're good for that purpose. And then it said, it shows that you're receiving something for your service. A lot of times those can be things like branded merchandise, a sweatshirt, a t-shirt, a hat. Those are all good. They have their place. It's nice when it's given during National Volunteer Week because sometimes you have them all together then, but it can't be usually the focus of the honoring. And then when you honor a volunteer, it could be formal, it could be ceremonial, it could be celebration of an exceptional service, and it's ideally most personal. It can also be a public celebration, a storytelling, or a focus of your legacy of your organization and of that person's contributions. And it really says to them, my impact and value is celebrated. We would oftentimes have volunteers that would celebrate big milestones. We're talking 50 years in an organization. And what we did in that organization is we made it as personal as possible. We told their story. Sometimes we had a video, sometimes we had other people share the story of what, people said about them. And it usually would bring a lot of tears. I would tell you that it was pretty emotional. And then we would do different things at different times. But whatever it was, we tried to make it as personal to that person and aligned with their motivations as much as possible. So here's some innovative ideas to celebrate the impact of volunteers in your organization. Now, these have varying impacts of how much work you have to do. But if you're looking for something where you have maybe a little bit of money or not a lot of money, but you need a lot of impact, these are some of these things. And so these are sort of out of the box. They're beyond like the have a banquet kind of ideas. So I thought I would share these with you. An impact gallery or a pop-up museum. In many organizations, the history of volunteerism is so very interesting, but it's not very often told. So why not have an impact or a pop-up museum that talks about the before and after stories of the people that they helped, the contributions that they made? Who are your first volunteers? Who are your current volunteers? And then I've seen this done before where they're on easels, and then there's a QR code and people can link to the story and people can write their own thank you notes. They can write their own memories in about how volunteers impacted them. If you have an organization that's very public and you can put this in your lobby, that would work really well. If you have a place where uh, a lot of public comes in, your clients come in, things like that. If you have a partner, organization where it would make sense for something like this to go, this would be kind of a cool idea. And then it represents the milestones. You could do things like, 500 meals served this year by volunteers, whatever it is. And then volunteers can walk through and see the real outcome of their work. It's powerful, it's emotional. And then with those QR codes and those thank yous, those can be shared out as well. So you get a lot of bang for your buck with this, with the idea of you've got to write some things up, you've got to create some boards, get some easels, and then be able to promote this impact gallery or pop-up museum. This is another one that I've seen some other folks do, and I love this one. It was a volunteer story podcast booth. And it set up a recording booth where volunteers can share why they serve, a meaningful moment in their service journey with you, advice to future volunteers. And then you can compile these into short Voices of Our Volunteers podcast series and share them out. You can release episodes throughout the year. And then this also helps you start to collect the stories. And one of our next sessions is actually on storytelling. And so you'll have time, not a lot of time before National Volunteer Week, but you'll have some time to be able to if create a path for volunteers to be able to quickly share a story. And then, of course, they can be edited and things like that. This is also a great way to encourage skilled volunteers to help you as well. So the surprise impact reveal. So instead of thanking volunteers yourself, bring in people that were impacted by their work. Here's an example. Patients or families record thank you videos. Youth participants write notes. Community partners speak briefly on the impact of volunteers. Even your board members, that they talk about this. And then the surprise factor is that it makes it incredibly meaningful. But you also begin to have a whole host of stories about how volunteers are valued in your organization. And if you could maybe partner with the media to share these, with local radio stations, TV, newsprint, and of course, using your social media, sharing them on there, it begins to have a very public facing effort to show the appreciation and the value of volunteers in your organization. I always like that one. And then this is also one of my favorite ones too. It's the Mystery Gratitude Week. We used to do something like this where every day through National Volunteer Week, and actually we did it through the month, where there was unexpected recognition. There was coffee delivered to their shift. There were handwritten notes from our leadership team. There were visits from our leadership team. There were surprise raffle entries. And then we would do random volunteer spotlight announcements in the organization. And we would look to our partners who we supported, whether it was a different department, whether it was a partner organization. And we said, like, how can we make this week really special? And so it just compounded where there were always things going on. We would decorate their stations. We did all kinds of goofy things, but they absolutely loved it. And then the unpredictability keeps the energy kind of fun all week. And we would just build in these little things that we would do the entire week. And honestly, kind of the goofier they were, the more they appreciated. I know it sounds crazy, but they loved it. And then here's some innovative ideas too in terms of a legacy project, something that's lasting and represents their stories of service. A few of those are planting a volunteer tree, a mural in the organization, a legacy bench engraved with the volunteer names, a time capsule. Especially this is something if this is a milestone year, like it's the 50th year of National Volunteer Week. We did something similar to this when we had a capital campaign, and it was the first year of that during National Volunteer Week. And there was a beam that was going to be put into the new space, and all of our volunteers signed it. In all honesty, it was all covered with fireproofing, and they knew that. But someday, some way, people are going to see their names up there, and then they're permanently a part of that organization and that building. And then turning recognition into something permanent, kind of the idea. We also did a piece of art at different times. We have there was an organization I worked with that we worked with a sculptor, and there is a one of his sculptures in the lobby, and it is dedicated to all past and future volunteers. And I always thought that was really a very important place to show the impact. Just as you come in the door, you see this. So think about that. And it is also a great way that the volunteers could also fundraise for that as well. So, a red carpet volunteer awards. I always say this is kind of like the Governor's Service Awards. That has turned into really a high impact event. Very fancy. A lot of people will never have a red carpet event, including myself. And so these red carpet volunteer awards. So make it fun and make it more theatrical. The red carpet entrance, the Oscar style categories, the short nominee videos, and categories like the Quiet Hero Award, the Rookie of the Year, and the Problem Solver. I think these are kind of fun things. And I think it's adapted to kind of a smaller organization. But I think one of the things about this is many times our volunteers never have these kind of opportunities. They never, maybe they're not people who could always afford like a fancy dinner. And so that's where those banquets and things like that, I think, are very impactful. But I think this is a fun one. And then I like this one too to really show in the organization the reach of your volunteers' efforts. So, pin showing where service was delivered, and then strings connecting volunteers to outcomes, and then milestones, miles of kindness. What this is it just visually shows like, how many steps a volunteer takes, how many uh, people they're served throughout the year. And it's a great visual storytelling that's something that the media will pick up on. It's something that you can use a lot throughout the year with your volunteer impact reports, recruiting other volunteers with social media, things like that. And I think it's always something to the volunteers to say, oh my gosh, we really did that. We delivered this many XYZs. We helped this many families, things like that. So, a skill exchange day. Instead of just thanking volunteers, give them something back. Invite them to personal mini sessions. Some of these, and I never thought this was going to be that impactful, but financial planning, yoga or wellness, a resume building, technology tips, and volunteer personal development opportunities. They tend to be much more well regarded and attended than I expected them to be. The financial planning thing, it was interesting. We partnered with some banks and some financial planners in the area, and they loved it. But our volunteers loved it too. And so it was easy, low cost. We're taking care of them, they're taking care of us. I did wonder at first if it might be like a conflict of interest or something like that. And it was very well received. If you have something like that that comes up, ask volunteers what they think. They may or may not need it, but a massage, a yoga class, a wellness opportunity, those were also always very popular as well. We also did one where you could meet with a dietitian. And our dietary department, when I was at the hospital, loved that. We worked with our college students who could do some group sessions, things like that. So focusing on wellness, it was a really great way to bring everybody into the fold and do something to give back to help their wellness. And then a pay it forward volunteer box. Gift boxes that for a volunteer that include a small gift and then a card encouraging them to thank someone else. And when we did this, it was tied to our STAR program. And what that was looking for an opportunity to see someone else in the act of doing something great for someone. And so they had the opportunity to give them a card. We would send the card out. We would see the note and we would put that in as one of those stories. So it was another way to collect a story. And then just putting a simple message in there. But it reinforces that culture of service and going above and beyond for those that we serve. And then letters from the lives you touched. This actually was one of the most impactful things that we did. We had a lady who had volunteered for 55 years. And this was really an incredible story. Her mother had volunteered with us, and then she later volunteered after she got married. And she volunteered in an area where she sewed baby blankets, but later she became at like what their auxiliary or their board's president was. She became their president of that board and later served on the hospital board. And what we did during hers is we had people talk about moments. We had moms and we had nurses, we had doctors talk about those blankets. We had people talk about the impact of some of the different things that they did over the holidays. And they would do like different color blankets. I did one on my son because he was born in December and he had a beautiful red blanket and he was all wrapped up in, and it was, I still remember the blanket, and I didn't know that volunteers did this. It was a very soft blanket. And then volunteers also would help out with different sewing things. Like in the ER, they would do these little blankets where out of like scrapped uh, material, and they would use it for pediatric patients. So, like if they came in with a broken arm, which my daughter was one of those people. And she had a broken arm and she didn't want to see it. And they put this little blanket over it. It was just a little square blanket and it was all decorated. And she brought that blanket to every appointment that she had. So she actually recorded a message, which, people were really moved by that. Many times our volunteers do not see the people that they impact and the little things that they do that make a difference. And so that one was, for me, one of the most important ones. That volunteer's family owns a kitchen showroom dealership, kind of they're kind of high-end kitchens. When we redid our retail dining, one of the things that we put into the dining space was a demonstration kitchen, and her family donated that demonstration kitchen. It is beautiful. And she said one of the reasons why they did that is that was always her dream. She wanted to be able to teach people how to cook, and she got married and she married this guy who does kitchens. And but this was like something she wanted, so she actually did a class in there, so that was really cool. So we got to make a dream come true as well. So think about that, think about those ways that you can make those impacts. And then we're going to talk about how personalizing the impact of the service can be. That was, I think, a nice transition into this. And then tell their story, not just their hours. That was one of those things that we always did for those more significant hours and more significant years of service, but replacing those generic citations with a short narrative. And then we talked about the specific moment they made a difference, who they impacted, and what makes them unique. I always love that. And I think anytime we could make it more personal, I think that's the way to go. And then customizing the physical award. We used to give out these beautiful pieces of art. And it was made by an artist in Michigan, and he passed. And we thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? So, what we tried to do was a more personal quote instead of just putting their name on an award. And then we added symbols, which is what we did before, the symbols that were tied to their service. If you're in an animal organization, things with pets, I think are wonderful. You know, we did that art piece was different for every year of service, milestone of service. And it could be sometimes it was a sun catcher that was personally made by this artist. It was a copper enamel piece of art. It was a larger sculpture, things like that. And then using things that are tied to their role or their responsibility. We've done some things like that when we honored our volunteers, like in the cancer center. Many of our volunteers came to us because they or their family had experienced cancer and had treatment in our organization. So we had a tree in the lobby and they would decorate it with the ribbons that represented their type of cancer or illness. So there's just some ideas there to make that impactful. And including a visual memory, adding a photo of them to their award or their certificate, I think is nice. A frame moment that mattered image, using a QR code that creates a short video or a slideshow that can be shared throughout the organization. We would always follow up our events with uh, notices to all of our staff. And in different organizations, we would have lots of people to share this. So we would do a slideshow of the event so that our caregivers, our other stakeholders could reconnect with those volunteers when they see them and say, "Oh my gosh, I saw you get your award. That was really great." And it just, what it did is it made it more personal and more of those connections. So pair awards with those video tributes, those short clips from our staff, people talking about them, other volunteers, and the folks that they helped. We would do this and we would have volunteers do it. I'm not good at this, but they would always make, like, sometimes they would make a funny one for National Volunteer Week. Sometimes we would do just even is it called a giblet or something? That little funny video at Christmas, our staff would do that. And then we would do more meaningful ones where it was for a specific volunteer. And it really was impactful. It was impactful to their families, it was impactful to them. And many times their families never knew how ingrained they were to the organization. But we would hear about this afterwards. And unfortunately, when people leave or they pass on, we would oftentimes see those uh, memories in their celebrations of life and things like that. So let others speak for them. Have, quotes from their peers, the beneficiaries. We talked about this a little bit, but also make the recognition feel authentic and community driven. We would allow for community volunteers to, or community members to highlight the volunteers. Tell us about a time. We would have things like in our public areas where they could click on a QR code and tell us about your volunteer experience, your experience with one of our volunteers. Tell us about your experience in the gift shop. Tell us about your experience in the family lounge, or one of the volunteers that came to give you a ride in a wheelchair when you left, things like that. So matching their award to their motivation. We've talked about this in past sessions about the different motivations that volunteers have. So if you're going to give them a reward or an honor, tie it to that. If they're a college student, or a young professional, could we do a letter of recommendation? Could we provide them with a skill opportunity where maybe it's exposure to a professional in that area? Or could it even be, helping with interview and resumes and things like that? Could it be someone who is like a middle of their career, and then we make sure that we send a letter of appreciation to their CEO at their company, their supervisor, to say, we want to say, we really appreciate this. And we understand that many of the skills that they share with us are things that they've been invested in your organization, and we want to thank you. If they're mission driven, think about that emphasis on the impact. Right now, our state is dealing with a lot of disasters, and we have a lot of disaster volunteers that are out there working. So talk about the impact. Make sure that they're like in the know. Uh, how much are they helping? What is the impact of that? Who are they helping? Things like that. And then the social volunteers, emphasize those relationships and the impact of what those relationships are sharing with the organization. And then when they're skills based, highlight the expertise and the growth and the value that they bring. Some of those skills based platforms will have a running tally of the gift that that person has given back. If the person has given back a value of a project that would have cost you $10,000, acknowledge that. And then the legacy focus, highlighting those long-term influences. I've talked a little bit about that in here, but it always seems to come back to the social connection and that cohesiveness in the community. So create non-traditional awards categories. I always think this is a lot of fun. So move beyond the volunteer of the year. Think about like those quiet heroes, those that are behind the scenes, that are consistent, the people that never expect to get highlighted or honored. The bridge builder, who is it that's connecting people? Who are your recruiters? Who's bringing people in? Things like that. Who's the innovator? Who brings you new ideas? I used to have a volunteer that would bring me ideas, and he was an engineer. And I swear, sometimes his ideas were so spot on and they were so good. And then other times I'm like, oh my gosh, he had this idea that we were wasting a lot of time in the hospital by having elevators that would pause before they closed. And so he did this whole thing on his own where he talked about the time. And I swear, he said, if you speed these elevators up and they close faster, you're going to create more employee productivity time. And I don't think that we changed those elevator speeds, but I think for the next 6 months, those elevators seem to close really fast. And I thought about him every single time. So not every single one of their innovations is good, but the fact that they're consistently doing that is amazing. He actually was someone who worked with our wheelchair manufacturers and upgraded how they manufactured parts on those wheelchairs so that they didn't wear out as fast. So many of his ideas were great, just maybe not the elevator one. The heart of the mission, who embodies your values and how do you see those? We've talked about those leadership packs and those going down to the level of volunteers, and volunteers talking about how the values of your organization, how do they show up in their work? What does that mean? What is the expression of your organization's values look like to a volunteer? And when they write those down and you can see them, that heart of that mission of who embodies those values and how that looks in the organization is very transparent. And tailor the description specifically to the recipient. What is it that's so important to them? A lot of times their family is very important to them. How can you include their family in honoring them? And then the volunteer impact profile. Give each awardee with a one-page profile that includes their why, their key contributions, a favorite moment you've all had with them, a quote from someone that they've impacted, and it's almost like a mini feature story about them. I would take this a step further, and I would have, if these people are open to it, give them the opportunity to talk about this themselves in a public, in an interview, something with a social media team, so that you can really spread the impact of how volunteers feel about your organization. Because as others see that love that they have for you, they want to be a part of that. And it's a great recruitment tool. The Moment You Mattered Award. I love this. Instead of focusing on the time served, highlight one defining moment where they changed someone's experience. Tell about that story in detail. It always creates an emotional connection and reinforces a purpose. I'm going to give you an example. We had a man that volunteered at the organization. He was blind, and he also happens to be Stevie Wonder's best friend. And I didn't know how this was going to work, but I would have him go and visit patients, and he would come in and he would talk about his relationship with Stevie, and he was a very outgoing, wonderful person, so warm, so welcoming, and he instantly connected with people. And patients would write our CEO and talk about this most amazing person that came in. And they never said he was blind, but I almost wondered if that was going to be a barrier. And as we talked, we found out he had done mission trips to Africa and different places. I thought, well, if you can navigate Africa, you could probably navigate a hospital. And so he would go in and he would bring something with him every time. One time he brought in this tool that he has that he puts it up to his clothes and it tells him what the color is. And people were fascinated by these things. Another time he brought his iPad in and he was actually featured on Oprah. Oprah had given Stevie Wonder a Rolls Royce for his 50th birthday. These are not gifts that people you and I give, but okay. So a Rolls Royce, and he told Oprah he was going to drive it. So there's this video, and our volunteers in the back and other friends in the back. Stevie is driving, his assistant's there, and it's this big open area, very large open area. And he tells him how to start it, and he's driving. And then our volunteer, JJ, is in the back, and he says, "Hey, Stevie." And Stevie goes, "Hey, don't talk to me right now. Don't interrupt. I'm driving." And we received so many notes from people who said they were having their worst day to having their best day. And who would have thought that someone like that would just come into their lives and just bring them joy for that day? And so I love that. But that's some of those moments that change someone's experience. And so they loved it. We had so many notes for some reason to our CEO based on his service, but I thought that was always a really cool one. So this is my last slide. And what I wanted to do is just share some fun things that I've seen done in the past that I think are great little ways to show appreciation and create like a little mini party and just make people feel glad that they volunteer with you. So we would do game nights, and we had a big open area, but we've also done this in gyms, things like that. And so we would have stations that we would have a game night and they would get prizes. It would almost be like a carnival. We've done it actually as a carnival. We've done it as, differently like that. Uh, we've also done auctions where we actually had an auctioneer, and for every auction dollar that they received for every dollar or for every hour of service. And so we would have gifts that we had donated, we had gifts that we had purchased, and it would always just be a lot of fun. And sometimes they were just easy things like a car wash. And then speaking of car wash, we actually hosted a car wash once, and it was just the most fun. We had our whole team out there. We had a whole, our parking lot. You came in one way, we washed your car. We had everybody was all dressed up, and we did pizza. They got lunch, so it was an easy lunchtime thing. We had so many people come in, and half the people that came in said they did not expect that they were really going to get their car washed. Like, oh yeah, yeah, we did. And it was something that even years afterwards, they would always remember that and they'd always kind of laugh about it. It was just a fun thing to do. And it was a way that we could touch a lot of people without a big investment. And then we also did a picnic. And sometimes our picnics were big, sometimes they were small, but it was an easy way to do it. And volunteers really did appreciate it. And then we did a friendly picket at someone's home or work. You want to, if it's at work, you want to make sure that they know ahead of time, but it's the surprise element of it. And we would have signs and we would have this little team that would go out and do it. And it was just sort of funny because people didn't quite understand or expect. And so it would catch them off guard. They'd always remember it. And then they would bring the person out to see the friendly picket. So that was kind of fun. And then a raffle of the day. We did this during that mystery one where we had different things going on every day, but different volunteers would get picked for gifts and things like that. They loved that. And then they had to tune in to see who received it. And so they didn't have to volunteer there that week to be able to have a part of this. And then I know I said that this was uh, a a benefit or like a token of appreciation, but tickets to a sporting event. Most of those entities, like the Tigers, the Lions, um, your local ones with like we have the Lugnuts here and MSU, they have always supported those things and they've usually given free tickets. And then I talked about this, but creating an art piece together, whether it's a mural, something that you're putting together, we've worked with volunteers, a volunteer to lead that effort. And that was always something that was really cool. And then how about a behind the scenes experience? Some of our volunteers thought this was really cool, but it was behind the scenes at like in our kitchen. It was behind the scenes with something with our physicians. But I've also done it where it was behind the scenes somewhere else. uh Let me think, what was it? One was actually at a donut shop. And so it all just depended. Another one was at a laundry facility. I know it sounds so goofy, but they were fascinated by it because their efforts went to the laundry service. So it was kind of cool. I talked about this, but that a wellness event, all those massages, the yoga class, the healthy food demonstrations, our volunteers loved this, and they were ways that others could help give back to. And then we've done this before too, that community meal with like a food truck, and that has been a lot of fun. We did that. and then gratitude stations where we would have through our lobby, and we've done this in a few different places, but they could go to different stations and receive something, talk to someone, get something, do a scavenger hunt around the organization or the community. We did, it sounds a little goofy, but depending on the size of the entity and the space that you have, it turned out to be a really cool thing. And then this is something I never thought this would be as popular as it is, but a photo booth at your celebrations. Our volunteers absolutely loved it. We had different things that they could put on, things like that. They loved it. And then we asked them, if they'd share some of their photos with us, and they did. And we were able to use those for some promotions that we did later too. So those are just some, kind of low cost, fun, easy ways to just make that week fun and to be able to just tell your volunteers thank you and put some love on them and show appreciation. And that is the end of my slides today, even though I apologize for the late start, even though we had a late start. I'm giving you 1 minute back. But this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you need help. You have an idea that you'd like to share that we could include in our own sessions like this. And I hope that we see you next time when we talk about our storytelling. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And